Mr. Wheeler?
Mr. Dave. Yeah, I think it was great. She added that context of the enterprise. I mean, obviously she's from IBM, but I think her comments would have been similar for any large organization, frankly. But that representative of, hey, this is what this is the kinds of issues we're concerned about. This is what we're going to do next. I think it was very well received. It was good to have. I mean, frankly, I have to admit, it seems to me, IBM has such a long history. It's so large that I think I don't think anybody said it, but I think there's a case to be made. Well, if IBM can do this, anybody can do this, because oh my gosh, I can't keep track everything because we're a large organization. Well, I'm not saying it's easy, but that doesn't mean you can't try to wrestle the snake down.
Can I ask one question, David, from the conference, Michael, if you don't mind, just a quick question, because it was a really interesting statistic that Frank mentioned. I believe it was, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it was something along the lines of like 80% of contributions to the projects that they identified came from like 130 developers.
It's a little more focused than that.
Okay.
It's when you look at the contributions of the last year, of the top, I think it was 100. I think it was the non-NPM. It's a little more specific than that.
Okay.
But the overall point was that there's a relatively small number of developers who work on the most critical. Work on many of the most critical open source software components, critical at least in the sense of widely used.
Right.
I mean, the Harvard one focuses on how widely it's used, not necessarily where it's used, or is it well managed or not. They're just looking strictly at the how widely is it used. But I think that's an interesting stat.
Yeah, I wonder if those developers would be interested. If they would be a good target for us to maybe talk to, or they might be a good source of information potentially, if that's something that makes sense. But I just thought that was a really interesting statistic. I mean, if we know who those developers are that are doing most of the contributions, maybe it makes sense to talk to them. So
we do. I mean, the only data we used for that analysis that wasn't public at the time was the Harvard list itself. Which we, the LF, had, but obviously wasn't public yet. But now it is. That data was actually just yanked straight from the. I think the original analysis was actually done by Mike Dolan, and I had done something similar. Although Mike's was more pointed, so I like his better than my own. Yeah, but it's just using pure data from Git. From the version control systems, which I think for all the top ones is Git. So, it's all public information, at least as far as that goes. Now, their email addresses may or may not be public, but for the most part, they are too.
Right.
And they're an obvious target for things like MFA tokens. I mean, target in a good sense. They're obviously they're the people who we really, really want to be helping and supportive of. They're doing. They probably don't know in many cases how important their work is.
Right. Absolutely.
So, quick question for context: was this the security maturity model discussion that you're referring to, or something else?
No, this is something else. This is the Census 2 report. I actually was part of a maturity model discussion this morning also, but that was a different discussion. So no, we're talking about the release of Census 2 from Harvard.
Okay.
Where they basically used SCA data to find out what are the most widely used application library level packages. Now, you have to be careful. That's not actually all open source software. So, for example, network time protocols everywhere, but it's not going to show up in this list.
Okay. Do you know who's the person at Harvard working on this? Do you happen to know?
Oh yeah, no, Frank.
Yeah, do you know, David?
Yeah, I'm the overseer of this thing. In fact, my
Okay.
name I think ends up on the report because I. So yeah, so happy to introduce, happy to do all that stuff. Absolutely, but Frank Nagel's the oh, what's this title? Is it PM? But basically, he's the research lead. He has a small team.
Okay.
Happy to, but and not only is their report public, but they have separately posted as CSV files their specific results of, ordered, for each category. Here's the list of the most widely used projects through different measures. You can just click and download.
Okay, I see that there is a link there, so that's all. Yeah, I was just professionally curious, but the link is all I need. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And by the way, somebody else organized that, but that data, that CSV data is, it's hosted by an organization who does this, I guess, as a primary task, and their goal is to make sure that this is archived and it sticks around. We don't want this data to go away. The analysis results.
Was anything from that security model discussion this morning of note? I'm not too sure about what the context around that was.
Okay. I was only able to be at half of that because it overlapped with my presentation. I felt I should show up for my own presentation. But
David, the second half was similar to the first half. There wasn't anything like super.
I was shocked, but they're focused only on evaluating Linux distributions. It's not general at all. And I can't imagine who this is for. Most people who are going to choose a Linux distro have already done that. I mean, occasionally you choose a new one for something, but okay.
I think there is value. So in the way that I wrote this in the chat. We talked about this a little bit at the meeting, but like the difference between these are facts about how a distribution, and I think you could extrapolate from distribution to like, I don't know, the Apaches of the world or any kind of larger than one project group. These are facts about how they run their process. These are facts about like durations of vulnerability exposure and things like that. I think once you add in and this is red, or this is good, this is bad, because you don't have enough kind of business level context on it, you wind up, I mean, organizations are free to express that opinion, but I think that's where you get kind of mirrored in arguments on like, well, this isn't meant for critical systems, therefore you shouldn't hold me to the critical systems bar, and things like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, you're certainly not going to get an argument from me that metrics are valuable when making decisions. I'll help you make that argument. Having written a whole bunch of measurement papers for things, but on the other hand, I mean, they clearly have a very specific focus. For example, they showed off in a lot of their measures with things like, here are detailed measures of exactly how they've configured OpenSSH. Now, I actually think that does make sense if you're comparing two different distributions. That's the primary way of getting in for admin. So measuring that for that particular kind of product is quite sensible. But so I'm not saying they're wrong, but what I'm saying is that only applies for measuring this particular kind of product. 99.999% of the time, this is not one of the decisions you need to make. It's a highly focused kind of decision that most people have already made. So, and the other ones that are more general, I look at that. Now, I only saw half, but like the one they showed off is, oh, look, how many commits were in the last year, and 0 commits is red. Well, okay, you can color code that. Sure, I agree with you. You can color code it. Does that mean it's risky? No, not necessarily at all. I understand why you want to make it risky. I would agree that that's worth a look. But it basically, I leave with they're measuring something that I'm sure is important to somebody, but it's hard. I don't know anyone for whom this is useful for, but if they have a customer, great, carry on.
Yep. Yeah, and so I think in general, like I support the idea of like there should be more thinking on this because there probably is a there in terms of how to measure things and I mean scorecard does it, chaos does it,
Sure,
tried to
sure.
do it, like it's all good stuff. I
Right.
don't.
I'm not objecting to metrics.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if they've got a great new idea, great. Let's learn about it.
Yeah.
But they have a very specific focus, and that's okay. I mean, but I just can't. That's not my focus, and I'm struggling to find how many people for whom it is their focus. Jeff Burke can speak for IBM, but I'm guessing that choosing between Linux distros is not top of mind for IBM.
Shocking. Cool.
All kidding aside, we love all the major distro platforms and remain staunchly agnostic because we support our customers' choice. So whether they're a SUSE shop or a fan of Mark at Canonical, it's all good.
I mean, I think maybe to just kind of approach it from a slightly different angle for things like this, even if we can argue that Izod is feature complete and no chooser of a Linux distro looks to see what the default SSH config is for that distro as part of making that decision. Maybe that's not the target. If the target was, I am a Debian maintainer and I can see that Fedora's default configuration is different than mine, and I have 6 months that I can spend kind of digging into the differences and understanding and why and rational and be like, oh, I totally forgot to like disable X11 forwarding.
Right. I agree with
that
you.
Provides value.
If you're making a decision, this kind of data could be very useful. I'm not arguing that. It's just that I think most people today, they're overwhelmed with hundreds and thousands of open source software components within their systems. And frankly, even if you have a Linux distro within your system, increasingly it looks like one component. Yeah. And I'm sure for folks talking to folks 30 years ago, they say, "What the heck?" But open source is so widely scaled now that this is just one of a very, very large number of decisions. So yes, it's useful information when you're making that decision, but there's so many other decisions that need to be made that it just doesn't. It only works at such a narrow problem. So, and I don't mean to cast shade on them, not at all. Yeah, and I also agree that the whole, hey, it hasn't been committed, therefore it's automatically a risk. It's not really true. Yeah. So your measurement is deeply flawed.
Good. Okay, so
Mike, just very briefly, I was wondering if Drew and I could quickly bring up something that fell off the meeting agenda at the end of previous meeting.
The floor is yours.
Partly because it's very quick and it's a bit time sensitive. So in a dizzying display of how fast academia moved 3 months after you brought up the topic of damaging and aggressive bug reports, we have a student researching this. And so she will be interested, and we will be interested to know what do you think are relevant aspects of the problem that you brought up that we should investigate, and also if you have any people you think we should reach out to, most likely in the vulnerability reporting group, that they could be interested in talking to us about this.
Sure. I'm sorry. I missed one really important word in your first sentence, and I'm trying to reverse engineer what that word was.
Can you repeat your first sentence? I had the same problem.
Oh, the first sentence. I don't remember how I began this whole speech.
Well, so for context for everyone, it's probably just worth bringing up what it is we're trying to do, which is there is this discussion about these sort of what I think we call bad bug reports, or like maybe
abusive, inappropriate. That's
yes.
Well, the actual sentence I was trying to refrain that Mike uses the don't be a jerk type
Don't be
of
a jerk.
approach.
Yeah,
don't be a jerk. Yeah.
Jerk being the key word here. So we're trying to, we have a student looking in this, this issue, and we're trying to, get feedback from people. What do they think is the important, what is exactly is the problem, and whether there are people we should talk to within OSSF. Since Mike, you brought up this problem a few months ago, do you have any perspective on this?
So, I mean, I have lots of perspective. I haven't done a lot of thinking about it. So it's really important, number one, because selfishly, as part of Alpha Omega, I would like to have a repeatable, well-articulated process for, reporting vulnerabilities. So making sure that we don't report, that we aren't jerks when we report vulnerabilities is important. But I think more generally, so the feedback that we got from a couple of large organizations is that this is actually a problem. And it's falling on volunteers that, are kind of doing their best. I'm getting a beep. That's really weird. I don't know where it's coming from.
Am I the only one having a beep in the
I'm hearing a beep too.
Double beep.
Started about a minute ago.
Yeah,
Like
I'm hearing
someone's
it
on
too.
hold trying to join or something.
Why does it have to do this?
While he's looking for that, I'll just
Is
mention
someone
that
trying
we
to
actually
get
had.
into the lobby or something?
Can you hear me?
Is it from the number, like the
Can you hear
plus 33? I think
they do seem to have the little audio.
You know what? How about this? I'm going to mute everybody, and if you want to talk, just come off mute.
Good.
Did that help?
That solved it. Good
All right,
job.
so someone here is has a beep in their background.
You know what? I suspect what's happened is it has it's basically partially disconnected. It's on pause. So anyway, we're okay.
Anyway, I'm sorry, Jeff, your hand's up.
Yes, I was just going to mention that we actually recently added guidance to IBM developers and product managers as to how to approach an open source community about a CVE, and to do it in a way such as that you are sensitive to the fact that it's a community project. They could be understaffed. Don't show up and just expect to demand action and get a fast result. What kind of relationship does IBM have with the community? Are there existing connections and paths you can follow to try and pursue this? And whatever you do, don't just drop a CVE out there without trying to give them courtesy heads up prior to doing so that you're not causing fire drills and or exposing vulnerabilities prematurely.
Would you be willing I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Would you be willing to donate that doc or a summary of it to OpenSSF? In particular, I bet maybe the OpenSSF Vulnerability Disclosures Group already released a document for open source projects. But it sounds to me that this is focusing on the researchers, the folks who find it. And I think that's the audience that's kind of missing, and it's more than don't be a jerk, although I think that's what originally caused this. It's don't be a jerk, and here's what you should do instead. It sounds like you filled in that part.
Here's what to be sensitive about and to have an appreciation for, because trying to alert open source community with respect to a CVE is different from, say, approaching a private enterprise who has a similar problem.
Right.
I mean, I think the two naturally are like they're two sides of the same coin. So having the coordinated the CVD guide include have another doc or same doc, different section, but have it be from the perspective of the maintainer, this is your world. From the perspective of the security researcher, this is your world. And maybe from I don't know where kind of the enterprise view because they could be both. But focus
Yeah,
there.
I would suggest they be two separate docs because you don't want to read, if you're in one role, you don't want to have to read the other one,
Yep.
but within the same group and
Same repo.
coordinated. Same repo, something like that where they're coordinated.
Yep.
I think would be good. Now I imagine that IBM has some specific policies that don't necessarily apply to everybody, but I bet there's a whole bunch of stuff that's really just common to all. And if everybody did it the same way, I'll bet IBM is sometimes the receiver, and you would like to receive the same way that you send in some cases.
So Crow is the main point of contact. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have his email?
I believe we don't. I know. I mean, I know he's active on the Slack channel, but I don't think I have his contact.
All right. I will share it. Yeah, I will post his email so that he can begin to get more spam. That's what he needs today.
I'm sure he's gonna love that. And in general, yeah, we're gonna go out and ask a bunch of questions to to maintainers who've been on receiving end of sort of negative attitudes. But if anyone is, of those folks in the meeting or even after the meeting offline have any interesting or relevant observation that they think we should be aware of, in terms of the specific things we should be looking for or asking or be aware of, I guess both Drew and I are very interested in hearing more opinions about this. And I know people sometimes have very strong opinions about such things.
And one thing that I want to be clear on, we're really interested in best practices for sure, and maybe helping to define what that is. But also, we really want to characterize how big of a problem it is. What's the scope? How frequent is it? How are people jerks? So that's a part of it that is, kind of a data gathering element, and having connections to the kinds of people who could ask those questions to would be really helpful.
So just so I'm clear, are we talking about behavior just out in the ecosystem, or are we talking also about a code of conduct for the OpenSSF participants?
I don't think it's a code of conduct for the participants because, in fact, they're not, I think, in general, not the ones causing the problem.
David, you're gonna have to talk. No, I'm sorry.
Shots fired.
I did open myself up for it. And now, how are people jerks? I can give you a few specific examples. Others may see some others, but a couple quick ones I see is very much entitlement. I sent you an email, send me $1 million. Why haven't you sent it yet? The sense of I did anything at all, therefore I expect you to give me money, give me things, when that was never an offer, and and so on. Another thing that I've often seen is gross misunderstandings of what's a vulnerability. Both the LF and Apache have already whined to each other, not whine, but basically look, it's another report that our source code is visible to the public. Okay, there's a remarkable number of people where they'll report that, hey, source code visible to public, your email addresses are public, your website has a misspelling, it's just not a vulnerability is I need the negative E, not a vulnerability for a lot of these. And I think part of it is that there's several folks who I think in many cases are not primarily English speakers who think that reporting something that and claiming a vulnerability is a quick way to make some money. And it's not, and I'm mentioning the not necessarily English speakers because I think they struggle to understand the materials that they're reading. It's not being spoon-fed. Yeah, and bug bounties programs do encourage this. So I just talked instead of typed, but if somebody
I would say
that'd be
also
awesome.
Just kind of unreasonable timelines. Not from my perspective, like working with the project as being different. So if I report a vulnerability to, I don't know, a bank or Toyota or my employer, I expect a certain level of commitment that, like, there's a promise because they're selling the thing. If I report the same vulnerability to is odd, perhaps my expectations should be different, but I don't know that that's. But at the same time, people use is odd in critical systems, so like I think there's an argument there on like, should there be different expectations when reporting things to a pure open source project versus a commercially backed open source project? What is 90 days? Have we just accepted as an industry that 90 days is the number? Does that apply in all except extreme cases? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that there's one number that will always make people happy. But I think I expect you to fix this tonight is often not reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how's this? We can at least say, so I added this to our notes: entitlement, not a vulnerability, and ridiculous timeframes.
Yep. And actually, just so when I was talking with this other party that was describing this, they used the word threats, and I don't know if they meant threats or like just being kind of a bully. Digging into that and actually seeing like, because when you're on the internet, nobody knows who you are. People are jerks in Facebook forums. Why wouldn't they be jerks when they're reporting vulnerabilities? And at what point, like, how do you, as an open source project, like this is the baby that this is your thing, and somebody's just called it horrible and have said all these nasty words to you. How do you deal with that? How should you think about that? And
Okay, I'm just gonna say if you can think of specific people that have that may be interested. And again, I know it's I don't want to. I know it's awkward to tell people to send more spam the way of people you're good, but we would be interested to in reaching out to those.
I will connect you with a couple folks.
Sounds great. I appreciate that.
Cool.
I've often wondered about the difference between formal and informal projects when it comes to the standards of behavior in them. There doesn't seem to be a clear distinction, but I think on average, the more formal projects have better standards of behavior among the community.
What do you mean by a formal project? I mean, a black tie?
Well, a project like this that has
There goes David misbehaving again.
And bullying.
Yeah, no, totally understand and appreciate your comment, Sebastian. But this is true kind of across a series of different salient attributes, to use a fancy term for characteristics, right? More established projects that have higher participation rates and support from not just individuals, but perhaps companies, all have, typically better documentation, better, higher likely chance of better overall structure and governance of those projects, better likely, the higher the likelihood that they have a code of conduct of some type, and that they are more responsive to their pull requests and other common elements. And so security would be a natural additional element where you would like to think that the more formal and or established and or mature and or larger projects have better overall characteristics than informal or smaller or fledgling projects, or projects that are dominated by a BDFL, a single individual that's scratching an itch.
I think that's where having projects collect together into groups, and that needn't be a incorporated foundation, but I think just having the larger scale of participation makes standards improve just by sort of sort of positive peer pressure. Everyone's trying to improve it, and so outnumber the people who are just there to make it awful for everyone else.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a blur. Many of the multi-organization projects started as somebody's single-person projects. I mean, both Python and Rust were essentially somebody's side project that grew a little bit. So, yeah, but I think it is fair to say they're different. Really, what I try to tell open source projects is just tell me how to report it. Because then the researcher doesn't need, a researcher shouldn't be required to spend hours and hours of research trying to figure out how to contact a project to report something. I don't think the researcher is really required at all to or should be required to understand the details of how a project processes a vulnerability report either. There should just be a way to do it in a reasonable way. And then they interact as they wish. But yeah, Jeff, I mean, the better those reports can be, if we could get these reporters to start on the right foot of I'm here to help, omitting all these problems, oh my gosh, that would help so many people.
I'm kind of I'm sorry, Matt, your hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, I don't know how to bring us back to the point at that point in time, but relative to when you identify a security threat and it turns into either a vulnerability of some form and gets reported someplace. I know the problem that we've been discussing internally in IBM and constructing our own bills of materials it is basically tracking the vulnerability relative to the bill of materials, or just tracking vulnerability separately, and acknowledging that vulnerability tracking and the SBOMs, the source code, have different life cycles. And there's an acknowledgement in both standards bodies, SPDX and CycleNDX, and specifically CycleNDX I've been looking at a lot because they have a new VEX format for vulnerability authoring documentation. And they acknowledge that the life cycle of the vulnerability can be very fast, and that you can actually say I've acknowledged the vulnerability as a state, acknowledge it. I've investigated, or I am investigating it. I'm fixing it. There's a lot of different states it tracks it through. I think that it would be good to provide, because we're looking for our own guidance in IBM of what we should do for these things. So we've come to a conclusion that for like pull request builds, live builds, or daily builds, we would keep VEX reports separate and track the internal status internally. But when we actually publish a product at a release level, a point level, a semantic version level for customer consumption, then we would basically make sure that all the vulnerabilities that were published were in a closed state. I was running, we were talking about putting guidance around closing, and should there be guidance around tracking that state relative to these bill of material standards, perhaps? I don't know.
Well, as a member of the SPDX working group, I can inform you that the defects reporting working group has just been formed, and they have their meeting later on today. So if you want to see how SPDX can do it, then quick suggestion for that.
I'd love to. David Edelson represents us there and reports back to us, but we're looking at CycleNDX at the moment. So, like I said, VEX standard was just published with 1.4 a few weeks ago. So we have something now that we can play with. So.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the chat for anyone who's interested.
Cool.
Yeah, if it's important, I would suggest put it in our notes, because the chat text disappears when the call ends.
Yeah, I don't know if there's overlap with guidance or tooling or whatever it might be, but I think it starts here saying, you should report it in one of these standard formats or give guidance how you would track it and report it. So basically, how do you make it public? How do you make that? How do you provide if you ever want to provide live data, like where are you at for log4j-fix? We're investigating. Some customers might want, and at some point IBM might want to be able to have the live data move in that direction for certain customers, right?
Excellent. Okay, so Lorenzo, Drew, do you have what you need for this to kind of? I know we're circling around the original the topic you brought up, but do you have enough from this group on?
This is great. I mean, I think we want to definitely continue some of these conversations, although maybe we don't need to take up the entire working group's time for that. But these are great pointers, and we'll probably be doing some follow up with some folks. Anything else, Lorenzo?
Yeah. If you again, as I said it, I'll say it one more time, then I'll stop. If you do know folks that are think are interested in continuing this conversation, or you are interested in continuing our conversation, I think Drew and our online presence is fairly easy to find. So do feel free to reach out to us. We don't want to bug everyone with this, but do feel free to reach out to us.
So how about this? In the meeting notes, what I'm just going to do, just to make it clear. Lorenzo and Drew for how to create vulnerability, and that way you will forever be tied to this topic.
I will expose myself
unless you have edit rights to the minutes, in which case you can,
Yeah,
I'll
put my in there. Get some spam myself here.
Cool.
Welcome to the club.
Awesome. Next topic. And I mean, don't necessarily need an update, but Luigi, anything on security insights?
Yes, I have continued to improve the schema. I think it is almost ready. And probably, I mean, I would like to coordinate, especially with OpenSSF and the scorecard team, to launch it after maybe a review from different team, just to be sure that we are working the right way, and comments and feedback are very appreciated, because it's not so easy sometimes to see if there are issues. I can share the link here. I would like to add, as I have written in our Slack channel, I would like to add a comment section for some properties, and I would like also to create maybe a threat model, because I have seen the scorecard has a short threat model. They explain why they sometimes don't give you some points or similar. And especially if we want that this file is used by scanners, we need to explain clearly what are the risks to use this file. I mean, the main risk is that some malicious user can just add fake information to have a high result or score in some scanner or database. But I think that we can mitigate this, especially if we start to work with the score from 0 to 100 or similar, to have a sort of ponderate approach. And but yes, I think it is almost ready. I have shared the comment in the scorecard channel, and then we need to like the XKCD meme. We need to coordinate a launch, and not just a communication to the public, but also now there are a lot of companies that try to contribute to OpenSSF. Maybe we can, before launching it, we can create an easy way to add this file in all open source repo of the main company that join OpenSSF, or the Alpha Omega project that have important open source project. In this way, my idea is that if we start always to use this standard in the most important open source project, then also minor open source project can start to follow us, because it is like security.txt. And this is the plan.
Okay. Do you feel like you've gotten enough input from folks within OpenSSF?
I mean, I have received a good input from our team / Slack channel, but at the moment, my personal opinion, of course, but my perspective is that we are a bit silos. So I have now I have written a message in scorecard, and maybe I can write a brutal message in general, so everyone can see it.
Yep.
And maybe we can receive it.
You may want to just set up a meeting. Throw something on the OpenSSF calendar, and just get, because I think a lot of this Slack stuff is kind of ephemeral. Whereas if I have something on a calendar and it's and I'm there, then you have my attention for an hour. So you might just get more actionable feedback.
I think it is a good idea. I will ping you for this probably. So
I will take care of it, or I'll sync with you and we'll take care of it.
Thank you. Yes, because I have never used the calendar in OpenSSF.
It's weird. You have to get permission, and it's hard, but it's fine. We'll take care of it.
And that is now in the file there are also the link to the list of dependencies, some other improvement, especially because David asked for a file that can use to add information to the page. Of course, this file can help to automatically fill some question of the CI page. Not every question, but enough probably, giving a link that people can check.
Well, it really won't answer many of them, but I think, so let's talk about that a little bit. I don't think the scheme is going to answer most of the badging questions. It'll do a few. But if we were willing to make some tweaks to, and the thing is, for the badge, in many cases, it's not just do you do it, but where's your evidence and justification for it?
Yes, for this reason, I want to add a comment section, especially for some property with the 500 character limit. In this way, people are forced to summarize, of course, the concept. They provide the URL. And in this way, there is enough information. I have checked some CII page answer. Some are very good, very long answer, but other are just link or the same link for the different answer and the short sentences. Especially I have checked Kubernetes, for example. A lot of evidence are just URL. It's normal at the same time. And for some question, the answer is in the same policy. For example, I see that a lot of some question have the answer in the contributing policy or something similar. And yes, at the end, I suppose that people read also this policy. They are not just for nothing in the repo. People need to read them. So,
right. Now, one thing we could do, which I think we've talked about in passing, but we haven't really raised it within this group. And I think maybe this is the right time and place to do that. The badging has a number of very specific questions about what is done or not done. Might it be useful to have a section within this spec that just says, hey, badging criteria, and within each of those, just steal the names of the criteria and say, is it met or not, or is it NA, and the rationale, which is a whole lot easier for, which if we did that, that would mean, obviously, that adds a number of additional entries to this format. On the other hand, it means that suddenly somebody can provide a whole bunch of data to the badges, at least, if you want to. And I would be very interested and might be willing to go ahead and write the code to yank that data in. The issue for me isn't that I'm not opposed. I'm not opposed to this. It's just we need enough data in this insights things to be worth writing the code to yank it in. Does that make sense?
So almost like if you took the badge and you exported the data as YAML-ish,
right,
and then you stuck that in the security insights schema somewhere.
Right.
And then you basically use that as a data source. Right.
So basically, maybe something that says badge : and then a name of a particular badge criterion. And then what are you claiming? I claim that it's met, and I claim my rationale.
So it's interesting. So a couple months ago, this really smart guy, David Wheeler,
I pitched this,
stressed to us how important it is to keep this simple, and that simple always wins out over complex.
This is simple. Hey, it's simple. Badge : name of criteria met. Is it met or not? Rationale.
I'll defer to Luigi, but I mean,
what do you think?
My question is, if sorry for the question. It can seem stupid, but do you want to have in the security insights a section for the CII badge criteria where there are written some answer, and in this way a tool can just fill the answer for the CII badge, right?
Yeah, it's OpenSSF badge, but yes, that would be that's what I'm mooting as something to discuss here within this group.
It is, I mean, my concern is that for the, at the moment, if we create a scanner that just wrap the some current voice in the security insight .yaml, this tool can already fill some question of the CII, not every question, of course. The questionnaire in the CII is very long. And I don't know if a very long file for the first version is a good approach. There is another idea.
I'm sorry, what's very long?
The number of questions in the CII page.
What, like 3 pages?
There are a lot of questions. I mean, the point is that security. I mean, I don't know if I am right. Honestly, it is just a supposition. But security.txt work very well because it is just 5 or 6 line, maybe 7 line. Of course, the YAML file cannot be so short, but at the same time, it should be a good summary of the security standard. The CII page is a very deep description of the standard for a project. And it can be, I mean, it's of course useful and helpful, but it can be a friction that can reduce the adoption of the standard. Maybe I mean, the idea is to introduce the same question or similar question that can use also for the CII page. But at the same time, my concern is the approach to introduce them in the security insights. If we add just a list of voice, people start to not fill the form. Also, if we offer a tool, because I have tried to fill the CI page question, and there are a lot of questions, in my opinion. So a very big project with a lot of people that work on it probably can spend time to give this information. A medium project, a small project, and I mean, I work in the Arduino. I can say that also projects that appears like big are not so big then, and people have no time, no knowledge. Sometimes there is no very security approach, and so offering just a first file with some contact, with some practice or policy, can be not so easy. I mean, my concern is that if we add too many features, too many information in the first version, no one adopt it. And
right. Yeah, my concern is the other direction. If we provide too little, who cares? We already know that Scorecard is resisting adopting this. I don't know of anyone who has agreed in Scorecards to use this. So we need to have something that's useful to somebody.
I know. Yes, and I have used an example to convince, 2 examples to convince the Scorecard team. One is that the Scorecard has already failed at least one time for Apache Foundation that is not so small. They don't use security.md because it is not a real standard, and we cannot base this communication just on this one single policy for the Scorecard. So also Eclipse Foundation has a total different approach to the open source. They don't have the security.md, they don't have the contributing policy in all projects. So at the same time, this file can initially offer the right URL, and it is already something, because otherwise you need to find the right policy in the right website. And the Scorecard can use this to reduce the false positive. Then we can continue to add more features, questions, properties. My question is, one of the questions that I have is if it is useful to add a very easy property like what do you have a CII badge, or what are the badges that you have? Because some projects show some badge in the readme.md, like CodeCov or something similar. And maybe a similar list of badge also in the YAML can help, because the README contains a lot of human information usually. The README is a sort of big policy for some project, because people don't want to write a lot of files, they just write a single file. And maybe having this badge converted into a YAML text can help. So this can be a first approach.
Cool. I had some folks have their hands up. I don't know if those are stale hands, but Jeff, Matt, and Eric. Matt and Eric.
I don't think I have mine up, but
yeah, I mean, I came in late to the meeting, so I don't want to eat up all the time, but just a couple quick questions. So for this YAML specific specification, I mean, is there, and I put this in the chat, but is there a potential impediment to adoption that you would essentially have to customize any application to leverage it? Or is the hope that this would be more of a read-only type of component? You know, an obvious follow-up to that is the next phases of this project to write a more automation component to leverage the data that's in the YAML. Is the one question, because while I see value in the data and having a specification for anything to use it, you know, it needs to be, there needs to be a process for it to be integrated, right? So that's the question that I'm curious about from that perspective. And then kind of more broadly in the metrics aspect of what we're talking about from earlier, just a food for thought for later. As you talk about building out custom metrics and potentially standardized metrics for security, is there a play here for incorporating, you know, AI and machine learning standards and practices to be more proactive in the approach to how metrics, taking it beyond kind of a simple monitoring to a more broadly capable observability solution?
First question is definitely for Luigi.
I can
automation.
Sorry.
In terms of automation, I think the answer is scorecards is kind of the first main consumer.
Yes, definitely the scorecard is the tool that I am using as sort of main point or first point of contact with the scanner, but technically also the scanner can implement just a wrapper to analyze the security insight. In my opinion, it is helpful for two reasons. We can collect evidence or just having more information about open source, but also we can, in the future, if someone starts to create a database, we can have a lot of information of new standard that start, for example, if someone had the security policies in a different path or similar, if people use a doc folder instead of docs folder. And this can help us to standardize the open source, because at the moment we know that people write documentation in a docs folder or doc folder or in a wiki. But if we see the real number of these, using this file, we can also try to convince people to adopt a single approach like security.md. It is a good approach, but it is not the only one at the moment. But if we see it is used by the 99% of the project, we can maybe create an RFC, convince people to have this standard. So this is also a collateral effect, in my opinion, if, and this is a big if, but if the security insight becomes a standard. So we need to convince people to this. Not easy.
And as far as AI ML, I think the problem actually does lend itself pretty well to that if we have enough signal. I would bet that some of the commercial organizations out there are already trying to do this. I haven't seen much in the open source space and kind of publicly available models that would gather a whole bunch of metrics and then spit out the likelihood that you'll have a serious vulnerability in the next, time frame. As far as risk, I think that's one of like the main. Well, there's a whole bunch of signal that you can get out of it. I think it's interesting. We should continue to talk about it. To my knowledge, that is not part of what any of the stuff in OpenSSF is doing today. I might be wrong, but I just haven't heard it. We are over time. Thank you all for comments, participation, all that. We meet again in 2 weeks. It's really great to see a whole bunch of new folks. And I apologize. I meant to do welcome intros to everybody next week. Or in 2 weeks, please show up. I promise we'll do a full round of intros. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your week and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Luigi.
Thank you. Bye. See you soon.
Bye. Thanks all. Thank you.